For those of you counting how many words it takes before I mention Donkey Kong Country, it was 13. The DKC series are some of the best platformers humanity has ever gifted us. If I didn't think so, why would I own the first game for Game Boy Color? It runs terribly. I love it. It even gives us more time with Winky. But the series was initially just 3 games released for the Super Nintendo, and if you squinted hard enough, it was actually 6 games total, and then it took a hiatus outside of just being remade. We didn't have any new adventures with K. Rool, Dixie, or even the main man himself, Kiddy. This didn't come to an end until 2010, when multiple console generations later, the SNES series came back on Wii, and after that Wii U. You can tell because I'm not featuring the Wii or Wii U releases here. But the games weren't the same thing they were in the 90s, obviously. Standards and technology changed a lot over that 14 years of sleep paralysis. Donkey Kong Country on Wii used all the power of that hardware to deliver state-of-the-art visuals for 2003. And it really used the environment to give us layers and a sense of cohesion much grander than what we could get with pre-rendered assets on an old supercomputer. I've already discussed all this in my video in which I returned to Donkey Kong Country Returns. It was called, Returning to Donkey Kong Country Returns. But as good as Returns and Tropical Freeze are, they are a new type of Donkey Kong Country, and that's great. I'm happy we got them, but there's still an unfilled niche for games like the original 3 titles, and filling that is harder than like a Lair that's impossible or something. But the closest attempt I've seen is a pretty slept upon indie game, which is named either Kaze or Kaze, I'm not really sure, I don't know. But it's called that and The Wild Masks. This game answers a question we've all had. What if Donkey Kong Country had rabbits instead of primates, and all the Kremlings were vegetables? And it doesn't disappoint, look, they're vegetables! Our playable rabbit hero has ears that are strong enough that they let her slow her descent, barrel out of slingshots, and handle all the ropes put in front of her. Comparisons are easy to make. Each of these feels directly lifted from DKC, with the most obvious being Dixie's hair twirl from Country and Lands 2 and 3, and the slingshot's basically just a barrel with a serial number removed. But also consider this. Who cares? They're great mechanics and I'm glad they're back. And since we only play as this rabbit who falls gracefully through the sky, it means everything has to be designed around it. If this was only something we could do dependent on if we hadn't taken damage, it would mean the game would have to allow the lowest common denominator to still finish the level. Dixie Kong's hair twirl was an assist, and at the risk of upsetting people who think they're cool for only playing games from the Clinton administration, Dixie was kind of an easy mode. Her propeller hair would make things easier, or be required only for optional elements in a level. But here in this game, we have level design that better fits this wide range of air movement. And since she's all you have, you also get to completely avoid being called an easy mode noob by the other elitists who only play as the toddler Kong. But even as just one character, we still have a 2-point health system, and we don't have a HUD either to explain it. We have this little buddy flying around us all the time, and when he's there you can take a hit, and when he's not there you can't. It's a very binary system for the most part, but this game does also offer an optional easy mode, which among other changes gives you 1 extra health point represented with an additional gold version of him, which then turns to the regular variation upon being hurt. You can tell this game is indie because not only does it give you the option to make it easier, it gives you actual options. You can rebind all the controls and even change a particular move to require just a single button instead of 1 in combination with downwards on the D-pad. These options also let us select one of so many different languages, and more importantly, we get to determine how powerful the rumble should be on Switch. It starts off at 20%, which is really all I needed, so imagine making it 5 times more powerful than that. It's surreal, it's a fun novelty, and I'm glad it's included. Indie devs think of everything. Wow, that sure is a lot of original content. Now let's get back to comparing it to some other games. At times, Kaze, or Kaze, is shameless in its inspiration. This level is just Stop and Go Station, but with a different level layout. But much like other similarities, this gets a who cares from me? It's fun, and most importantly, the enemies here wouldn't terrify a child the way the old game did. I can easily make comparisons between levels or certain gimmicks, but it really is a disservice. This game is much more than its inspiration, but before I explain that to you further, I just need to reiterate, this game loves thorns and making you fly through them. Yeah, this game is pretty shameless. The levels all have a unique feeling to them, and since this is ultimately a rather short game, with levels that are only a few minutes long, it also does mean nothing has a chance to overstay its welcome. This is a concentrated burst of good level mechanics, and not a single stage is the dreaded not fun level that Rare were unintentionally consistent in developing. Though the opening stages, while not terrible, do make a terrible first impression. They're there to get you used to the game, but they don't hold a candle to the levels later on. Initially, I was getting the impression this would just be a poor person's DKC, but it really did win me over, and now I realize it's the DKC for people with little free time. Levels are short after all, and this game is much easier as well. This is a nice sampler platter of the original trilogy. May I interest you in a version of Bramble Scramble you'll probably beat on your first playthrough? These thorny levels do show us one thing that these developers knew made the original games as fun as they were, and that's the animal buddies. Though here it's represented with masks that partially transform our hero. The bird one is the most obvious example. This is just Squawks but with less button mashing. My delicate fingers can't handle Squawks much, especially if I'm expected to race as him or something, but these levels were effortless now that I feel comfortable doing them, and compared to Returns and Tropical Freeze, they're even more amazing because these levels actually exist. The levels designed around this are all masterful, and much like the transformation barrels or even the single ear-twirling hero, everything has to be built around this. It's not like you'll lose a power-up after being hit. You're flying or shooting slightly awkward projectiles throughout all the sections designed around it. But this bird form is the most obvious comparison. The others feel a little less copy-paste. Being a shark means we get to swim, and it's nothing like On Guard. It's actually more like Tropical Freeze's swimming, but it doesn't use an air meter so it's automatically better. Movement is perfected here. The swimming is so freeing and the movement is just perfect here. The levels still maintain their great pacing. These are still linear obstacle courses. The game is just as hold right to win even as a fish, but I'll get more onto that later. Still, I'm really happy the shark is here. It would be a straight up lie if there was a return to Donkey Kong Country and it didn't have any water levels. I'm glad they didn't do something like that. The transformation that deviates the most from your expectations is the tiger form. We cling to walls and do an air dash. So it feels very much like Mega Man X. But since YouTube is nothing but people much younger than me, it feels like, Celeste, except you only go sideways? You know Celeste, right? I'm hip. I like games made this generation. This form opens up level design the most, in my opinion, and it leads to some of my favourite moments. Who doesn't love an air dash? However, it being so similar to the base form, as it is still us moving on land, it did lead to a few moments more than I'd like to admit, where I did an air dash at the wrong time because my muscle memory brain wanted to do a helicopter twirl. But I suspect that's just a me thing. It's just the other forms feel so completely different mix-ups never occurred. Speaking of which, it's time to embrace the power of a dragon. It turns the game into an auto-runner, or if you want to be cynical, it turns the game into a minecart segment. These are some of the most bombastic stages. The pace never stops, and since you can't really deviate from where the devs want, it's all carefully laid out to maximize the experience. Unlike a minecart, however, we have an extra air jump and an even more fun diagonal downwards air dash. This stops our momentum and forces us to crash down to a lower track or an enemy to bounce off. It's just an extra wrinkle that helps set it apart from what you'd initially expect, and it turns some automated moments into the peak of the game, like dodging purple lights and hitting the blue lights only to slow down the scary anglerfish ghost chasing us. This as a whole is just another level using the same gimmick from Stop and Go Station. While that was the first stage to use it, this is way later in the game so they can reiterate it with a whole new direction. By this point you should be ready for more of a challenge. Levels ramp up in complexity, so it never gets that hard, especially for casual playthroughs. Remember, we have unlimited lives and multiple checkpoints, and this character can glide through everything. This isn't 16-bit hard by any means, despite its clear inspirations. But much like a lot of platformers, especially the Kong-filled ones, we have a lot of stuff to collect here, and these are often in harder to reach areas, or hidden in a way that are usually, but not always, a fun thing to stumble upon. The plentiful gems we find, you know, the coin or banana equivalent, have been translated wonderfully to a game with no lives. These are just one of the many collectibles in-game, but instead of slowing down the pace to worry about getting them all, you only need 100, and there are slightly more than that per level. They're all out in the open anyway, so you shouldn't have much difficulty finding them. They're just a small wrinkle here, but a fun one nonetheless. K, A, Z, and E letters are also easy to see, but they're much harder to grab collectibles. Like the main gems, they're basically here just to give you a higher completion percentage. Cool, not much to say, it'd be weird if they weren't here after all, and it's not like they can tie it to an extra life or something. But the other collectible I alluded to is much more up my oil drum alley. Bonus rooms were really fun in Country 2 and 3. We don't really talk about the first games except to acknowledge them, and we definitely don't talk about the ones from the retro duology either. But here, they're all so much fun and basically a microcosm of the level they're featured in, which also means no two of them are the same. The entranceways are usually pretty easy to find, and the few that aren't can be found thanks to the internet. Once you enter it, a timer appears and you're basically tasked with something like killing all the enemies or collecting all the green gems. Very simple tasks, but due to the amount of level gimmicks each stage offers, these bonus rooms are also so varied. Sometimes transformation masks are used in these as well, which is so liberating in an era where Donkey Kong Country hates good bonus stages and it hates animal buddies. Collecting all the goodies from these bonus stages opens up new levels, though instead of being relegated to a new world, they're just slotted into the middle of existing worlds. It does seem kind of awkward at first, but they're just in the middle rather than being at the end. You will have to move past unavailable levels during your first time through any given world, but it does achieve that thing where they're annoying enough that they're practically begging you to reach them, and you have to give in. It's a little annoyance in the best kind of way. They could have put these in some kind of bonus world that the majority of players wouldn't even suspect existed, but no, they're here front and center and I'm glad for it. Plus this serves both kinds of players. Those that do secret levels for post-game, and those that do the secret levels the moment they're available in each world. These completely optional levels do ramp up the challenge quite a bit more, but they all feel more like the end game kind of stages, so the difficulty curve is all over the place for those who tackle them early, but hey, that's just the Lost World experience. All these levels do ramp up the challenge even further when full completion is your goal. Sure, getting all the shiny things is part of it, but the real fun is the no damage runs and the time trials. Both are pretty self-explanatory, but they do change the feeling immensely. Even though it isn't that hard to avoid damage, it's the stress of knowing one mistake is all it takes. In a lot of levels, I achieved this while also getting the best time, and this just inflated my ego, which I'm happy with. Though that's really cause the time trials here are all incredibly easy to breeze through, if you're good at holding down the right button and reacting to enemies. These aren't really challenges on the level of something like Crash Bandicoot or even the modern DKC's optional time trials. To me, these are the easiest time trials I've ever seen in a platformer. The real challenge is just making it to the end without dying while holding down the D-pad. There aren't bits of levels that you need to completely master or corners that are cut, and since you can still get through it while taking one hit, you're free to make some mistakes, which I sure did. Though it is slightly made up for the fact that a single death means you have to restart from scratch. This is a fancy, no checkpoint mode disguised as a time challenge. Funnily enough, this game's multiple automated levels still feature these time trials, and the only way you could not beat this is if you just stood around the beginning doing nothing for a while. But for all the complaints I have about the time trial system, this is where the game really shined for me the most, because it really emphasized just how much these levels are built for speed. There are no dull moments here, it's all movement all the time. Other games might have you stop and start every few moments, but Kaze laughs in the face of them. There's no blowing dandelions to find secret puzzle pieces here, just hold right. And if cutting corners and showing your mastery at a children's game is your jam, the time trials are online to compete with all the other fans of the game. These are your real time trial challenges. Wow, the only thing that would make this game better is if we had some boss fights. Wait, I already used that line in the last video. It's okay, no one watches these. Anyway, we do have boss fights here and they're all phenomenal. And best of all, some of these are based around the transformations. More games should have bosses where I fly around as a rabbit wearing a mask with a bird spirit in it. I've always said that. Though these are the kinds of boss fights that do require you dodge and wait for an opportunity, so if that's not your thing, oh well. At least the boss music is great here. In fact, all the music is great. But hey, that makes sense given the game's inspiration. This whole game is, like I said earlier, it's a nice sampler platter of what Donkey Kong Country is. I could see someone preferring it to the main series given how there's no lulls here and it's welcoming to all sorts of people. I can't say that, however, not because I don't believe it, but if I do I'll be banned from the DK Vine forums. So instead I'll just play it safe and say there are some elements here I prefer, and some levels I find rival the best of Donkey Kong's past. But I won't say it's a better game than any of the 5 previous Country games because I'm not allowed to. But I think I can get away with saying it's better than DK64, right? Yeah, it's better than DK64.